understand that, and this is a tremendous Gemara, that the whole, any type of meat you keep it open, maybe all kinds of meat, there is a dispute, and we will find out later whether or not this is the halacha or rabbanan halacha in relation. You should not cook a kid in its mother's milk. It says that 3 times in the Chumash, and as I'll learn in this, we're now on Gimel days, right in the beginning of the series, that cook a kid in its mother's milk. So one time they learned it for an Easter to cook a kid in its mother's milk, and presumably he's talking about a cow. You don't even have to eat it, and you are committed to Easter there, right? So actually it depends if they're hot. So we will discuss it as well. Pre-Rishon will also be because we will learn is when the vessel has been exposed to open heat. And that's presumed to be able capable of cooking what's inside of the vessel. Sheni, say for instance you have a pot that you cooked on something on the open fire. That pot is called a Kli Rishon. If you pour from that pot into another pot, the other pot is called a Kli Sheni. Although it's receiving the heated, it has both sides, so it's not capable, theoretically, of cooking. And then you want to make tea, it shouldn't be any shadows. I remember one of my rabbis, if it's not cooking, why am I burning up? You can't at all. It's interesting to note. At any rate, so you would think that this only applies to Gedi, and the same law applies to a chaya, a deer, or a halacha, or the rabbanan halacha as far as Kayanot is concerned. Okay? Except the flesh of fish. That grasshopper like that the Torah gives a hector that you can eat. Because manenu, we don't eat those because we don't have a Kabbalah, at least in Ashkenaz Jews, to eat these chagol, because we don't know which mean it is. You understand? The type of grasshopper thing. They have a tradition that they do eat it, so we. I'm not saying that they exist, but us Ashkenaz Jews have lost that tradition and we don't eat it. So if the flesh of a fish or the chagol, or at least if we eat fish, is mixed with milk, there's no Easter. There's no Easter. There might be some kind of Easter involved regarding some foods you shouldn't mix together, but as far as there are certain things, the Shulchan Aruch and there's more about each combination of for health reasons, but not necessarily for kashrus reasons. Yes, sometimes. So yes, that would be it. At any rate, Rosh Hashanah Kiva Gvina al Shulchan prohibited to bring it up. This feast right in close proximity with cheeses on the same table. We got different types of tables. You have a table, serving table, where you put the stuff together. There, nobody, there, and the Gemara will later say, is not too much of an Easter. They're two separate things, even fleshik the milk on a serving table, because nobody's eating from it. And you would discern, presumably you'll put them on one side, the other side, the other side, and each one. Of course, it's not a good practice because you have to open the package before you can eat, or that's like a gather, separate. Yes. The shaila is when you're eating at the same table. And then a question, the Gemara will discuss it. There are different types of people. If it's a person that you are accustomed to eat with, or if it's a stranger, really not inclined to take his food. Anyway, so we're making a prohibition to put it on the green with there, on the same table, flesh of fish and clubbing together with gavino, with milk. And there's no Easter involved. Now, no there, what if a person makes a vow? First of all, it's much better that you don't make the vow at all. Because making vows is not a good practice because they're not the Borei Olam. The Borei Olam can make a vow. Why? There's nothing going to stop the Borei Olam from doing what he wants to do. But us human beings are prone to many factors that we are not even cognizant of. And so it's much not to say something rashly that you might find later you can't fulfill. And then therefore it might be considered like you're saying things that you don't mean. And therefore your words would not be acceptable to God. But every time you say something you don't mean it. So when you pray to God and you're trying to mean it, to accept your words. It's like the thing by the Paul Wolf. That very concept, you call it, that very concept there, if a person is accustomed to say a lie, even when he tells the truth, nobody will believe him. And so the same thing, if a person makes a neder just like that, it's not the proper thing to do. But if he does do it, and he does fulfill it, of course it's okay. But he shouldn't put in a position, and we're getting a Chullin right here. We had that thing, what kind is permissible if you say, if you place it upon a person, that's not a proper thing. In other words, I have to do it regardless of what happens. That's not a good thing. But if you say, I will give this if this is still available, that's much easier to fulfill. Now, you make a neder. When a person speaks and makes a vow, what do the words mean? We have different concepts about this. First of all, a word can mean a lot of things. We usually use the language. What people would ordinarily say these words would mean. That's what when we go and analyze a neder, we say, when he said these words, for instance, he made a vow, I will not eat any meat. What does it ordinarily mean? What does it encompass? What prohibition is he taking upon himself? You see, so it says, if a person makes a vow, and he will not eat any meat, that person is still permitted to eat the flesh of fish and the chagavin if he's got a kabbalah on that. And he's not prohibited to eat it because nobody says that it's considered, although in truth, the flesh of the fish is the flesh of that particular animal. You understand? But for our purposes, when people talk, they don't usually say, don't give me flies, don't give me fish. So it's a question what people ordinarily think. Look in Rashi. All flesh is prohibited in milk. The alpha gav, even though the Omar Bona, it says in the Torah, Gedi, you shouldn't put the kid in his mother's knee, and the kid, Gedi, could mean Gedi easy, or Gedi, D means a young one, of a shore. When it says, Huadin, alpha gav Omar Bona, Huadin, the same law would apply, the same law would apply to Chayanov, even though it doesn't say it specifically Chayanov. I understand that, but there's a question here. Would you postulate, what if you're still committing an Isha D'Oraisa, because it is milk? Immediately, later on they'll have a dispute, and if you said the Isha, cooking, Sir, Chayanov, is the D'Oraisa Isha. The Omer the Rabban. Others say no, it's only a Rabban. So he's a Rabban. Follows, and then the second part is prohibited to bring up on the same table with milk. Why? Perhaps you might eat them nogi because they touch and they absorb from each other. You would have to have got to be cast. Sonan Gemara will later ask the question a little bit less of a chance of anyway, they're worried about that. Even though it's permissible to eat meat after Gvino, the Gemara, like we learned in the Gemara will say, as long as you have a Suda Acheres, you have a second feast, a different meal. In other words, you have to have a different meal. What constitutes different meal? Everybody agrees you've got to cut off the first meal before you can have the second. And it's like the guest who came to dinner and never wants to leave. He says, I wish he'd come again. But if he has to come again, he has to leave the first time. You understand? The same principle is here. One different type of milk. After Glino, if it's Suda Acheres, another milk. How much you should wait a half an hour. He said that after a half hour, wash out our mouths and everything. Not necessarily specific. And we'll learn that later. All right, go further. And then on top of the page, Rashi, person makes a vow on meat. Ein daito elo akalosh mineo. This was the Rashi tells us. He's taking a vow according to the language of people. In other words, don't get very upset and say, in truth, this is the meat of the fish, this is the meat. Says no. You make a vow, you speak like people ordinarily speak. And people ordinarily say that meat is fish. Theoretically, it's not nowadays. We have this big scientific things. We won't worry about this. This is the way it is, at least about the neder. Now the shaila will be later on, maybe there is a difference more between loshen for a neder and loshen and iser basar. Maybe there are two separate types of isuri. You understand? Yeah. And just because by a neder, by basar, it's not necessarily so. I mean, but you can relate it. Maybe it's a different standard. You understand? The Torah shop adovakat. For another, ain't daito. Anybody that makes another, his thinking is only lu kori shema adovakat, and he calls the thing that this way. It's in our Mishnah. Ho min basar or any type of meat. A person does call it meat, except the flesh, fish, and chagavim, that he doesn't call it meat. That the mere fact that people call it, that's the way we have. Regardless whether in Metzius it in fact is not meat. In fact it is meat. In truth it's the meat of the fish, it's the meat.
I know some people consider when you say meat and you say not meat, but usually speaking people say
right. And any question on the Mishnah so far? No, that I'm afraid of. These kibbutz salivas, that I'm afraid of. When you think that you know and you think, I can handle that, when you start coming with the salivas, I know that this, you just he knew he was arguing with you. That's the way it goes. I figured like this, no strength. It says, and then the Gemara says, what you're trying to say, you're excluding from, you're saying, only basar dogim chagavim, basar off, is presumably osir diaraisa. Because you only exclude chagavim and dogim, right? At least we're at this point.
Because the only one they exclude.
The Gemara asked the question, come on, is holding this position. The Roker of the Akiva, the Gemara is postulating. Why? The Akiva, that is the one that's saying these halachas. Omar, Einu min Torah. The Easter, the relation to Chai Oath, is not min Torah. So he says it specifically. Later on, we'll see, in fact, that's exactly what he says. So, all right. So we see from the first part of the Mishnah, it appears it can't be according to Rabbi Akiva, because we're presuming that's an Easter Rashi you're talking about. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva later on says, the Chai of Oath, and the Cholov is only Easter Rabban according to Rabbi Akiva. Later on, we'll say. He disagrees with the ratio of the Mishnah. Now let's learn the Sefer. Ema Sefer. Let's say the last part of the Mishnah. The last part of the Mishnah just says, if a person makes a vow against eating meat, he's permitted to eat the flesh, presumably implying, but to eat the flesh of a poultry, he's prohibited to eat. In the first part, it appears to go not according to Rabbi Akiva. In the second part, it says that eating by Nidarim, we go after Lashon B'nai Adam, and we have to, it comes from our Mishnah, that it's the way of people to call Bosser, this last part of it, the Omar, Mimlo, of Shalia, anything that a agent asks about. In other words, you say, do something in relation to me. Anything that an agent asks about and says, should I also do this? Bar minehu. It's considered the type of a thing that the agent was authorized to get. How do we know that if an agent, a person appoints an agent to do something for him, and he specifies, the agent says, should I also be able to do this? Implying that the original direction could not include also an additional fact. So he says anything that would be prompted the agent to ask, is this also included? Is considered as intended to be included. It's one of the things that was intended to be included in his agency. You understand that? If it would prompt him to say that. Now, I'll give an example of that. The Sanya, we learned about another minayerek. What if a person makes a vow? He's not going to eat any greens. He's not going to eat greens, like yerek, we call vegetables sometimes. Greens. He's not going to eat greens. So now, again, we learned before that Lashon Neder, Lashon. Now the question is, mutter v'diloy. He's still permitted to eat squash, or let's say for our purposes, let's say that. So ordinarily, when a person says I won't eat greens, he doesn't mean to include squash. Yes. Okay. So we say, because ordinarily people don't mean by greens that there is fruit, but Joshua will use that, but I don't know if in this Gemara it means that. Because cucumbers is green, and
and since it has, the British would be that cucumbers are not considered in that category because they're considered green, but they
well, we have a third thing to bring in.
Leafy vegetables.
That I see that.
Carrots would be okay then.
I don't know. There again. I just want, for our purposes, I have a sneaking suspicion we should use it as boards and include that type of recipe.
not eat squash, you need a
Didn't bury him at all. Yeah. I mean, you open your big mouth, you make a lot of things because they're big. All right. Another minaya makes a vow not to eat greens. President Chullin as Kilo Omer, and Rabbi says, it appears that the pasuk will be a kilo. Where you say that another minayerek, what is the loin, included in the yerek, and the Kama says to the Akiva, Aplanu yerek, take for us green, that it's not yerek, and how can you say it's also? Well, I haven't. Okay, that's over. This is my proof. That's over. This is the thing. It is because of what it said. Because he asked the question, all I found was legumes, peas, or anything like that. He doesn't say that because he included the loin, squash, and gourd to be included in this generalization. Beans and peas are not. There again, I'm being not a farmer. I don't know. I have seen. Yeah.
the beans.
Maybe they're also called.
Although the loin with the squash, maybe has a.
Okay, so wait. So first he's saying that if somebody says that if somebody swears not to eat leafy vegetables,
Yeah.
they exclude squash.
Also,
Then
yeah.
the squash is also also.
Yeah, because of the gourd.
So then they're asking the question, but what if the shliach comes and says, I couldn't get any vegetables, but I got squash?
Oh, I didn't find anything particular. He says because they have to ask him. He says I only found this is a proof they didn't include it because I would even have to mention it if it's not even included. Because if he mentions I didn't find any again, I don't know that nobody has understand it so far. Mishnah, which is not usually the case. So we have to part it like this. Race. The first part is that would be according to Rabbi. And presumably the last part is multiple that he holds anything that's asked about, whether it is the thing, is considered a part of the thing.
Okay.
But you would ask, consider it possible. You want to say a hybrid. Mitzvah, leave it to Tanoi, that even though that you have to ask about it, yeah. You have to ask about it, it's still considered a part of the measure.
Yeah.
That, the matter of fact, you don't exclude Basro.
It's just how we get around to it. If you don't say it, you still, if you don't exclude it, you're including it.
Yes.
You include it, but not if you just exclude it. So,
Everybody agrees.
Rabbi,
And Ravashi, of course, will say, come on, just the way we have to learn chapters or follow. Find in that classification, Mehem Mejiv Torah, some of them that they have Isha, and some of them is of the Rabban. The Isha kind of oak, except the flesh of fish and it has no reason not to do this Torah. When it says Torah, and you say perhaps we, what it is in our Mishnah, I picked up, and this chapter, and that you'll find with your Kiva, this passage. We say that if you make a word to say fish is not called the one that Talmud didn't know how to cut them out, requirement, so put them out there. Also, on a certain knowledge. We have to go according to knowledge, Doser, in relation to the Doris. So, meaning in Mila, anything that an agent would ask a question about it, anything that cannot be understood plainly, so not in the general statement, and it has not something that's definitely excluded from the general statement. So therefore, it's in a limbo state. It's a doubtful thing, whether it's included or not included. It is not definitely included in the general statement. Neither is it definitely excluded from the general statement. And so therefore, if that situation arises, therefore the Shliach has to return to verify, to show how historical is there. Do you need to include this in your general statement? Nino. What's the next word? No. Also, there's a couple letters. That same type. That same type. Hashuk, going by for us from the marketplace. So it's not included ordinarily on the flesh of it's not excluded either. It's not included. And he asks the Balabais, the employer, the one that is principal, and he asked the question, should I be able to buy the flesh of poultry? Because his master gave him a power of attorney to buy. So he had to clarify, should I also be able to buy basar? That might also satisfy his master's Minahu, according to it. He was considered a classification of the side, and therefore it's considered mean basar. Overlow, because it says buy from me, mean basar. And if poultry was not a type, to buy flesh. Yeah. Okay, fine. So it gives a proof to that. So, Louis, I only found these boards, or squashes. There ain't no looking, and immediately when we found greenery for my leg, because he just said generally green, and if it was in the generalization of the word green, well, this is the thing. Yes, this is the proof that it is considered a type of thing that he was authorized to. And from there, he may be right. I'm bringing a proof or evidence. Yerek, that it is considered a type of yerek for the board. He was just kicking it legumes to say I didn't plan on kicking it. I don't know why this is so, because I don't know. In my simplistic mind, not you. Yeah. If you fell. No problem at all. Oh, well, that's... you got an umbrella?
Derek?
Yeah.
I don't know myself logically, in my mind, but I don't know. See, tomatoes, no.
Maybe you are more acquainted with these... I was also born in the city, I mean, not always next to the Madrid. There's different cheaper than the rest. I don't know, I can quick... Maybe I will take it from that. Yeah, but I got a mechanic that killed my dresser was killed, and they weren't worried about people black, a riot.